Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another illegal breaking reporting video analysis update. Big props for Phil Who do I mean by Phil? I mean the governor of a Republican-led state, which is Vermont, for legally, lawfully, and rightfully backing down to Trump's illegal, unlawful, and unconstitutional and authoritarian demands and actions to try and take over National Guard guardsmen and women from every single state to combat zero crime rates. Why do I say zero crime rates, ladies and gentlemen? I say zero crime, which means bullshit accusations and statements from Trump and his piece of shit administrations, especially that fat moron Caroline Leavitt and Pam Bondi. Sorry, I had to think of her name there for a second. Let's get into this new reporting and figure out what it all details and discusses in this brand new legal breaking reporting. Again, shout out to the governor of Vermont, ladies and gentlemen. And ladies and gentlemen, the article is titled Phil Scott rejects Trump administration request to use Vermont National Guard in President's D.C. crackdown. Let's get this one thing straight here, ladies and gentlemen. It is not a D.C. crackdown. It's an attempt of an illegal authoritarian takeover of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Force. Ladies and gentlemen, the article reads, Governor Phil Scott has turned down a second request from Donald Trump's administration in as many months to use members of the Vermont National Guard to carry out elements of the White House's controversial domestic policy agenda. The Department of Defense last week asked Scott for a few dozen troops it could deploy to Washington, D.C. as parts of the president's sweeping push to crack down on crime in the city, Vermont Public reports. But the governor said no, telling the Pentagon he didn't think the request was an appropriate use of the Guard's resources, according to the news outlet. Dustin Degree, a spokesperson for Scott's office, referred V.T. Digger to the Vermont Public story in response to a request for comment. Friday afternoon, he declined to be interviewed or answer questions about the governor's decision. Trump has ordered hundreds of troops onto the streets of the nation's capital in recent days and moved to assert federal control over the city's police department. At a press conference Monday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said states could be called on to reinforce the city's National Guard if needed. On Friday, Washington, D.C., Attorney General Brian Schwab sued the Trump administration over its efforts to illegally, ladies and gentlemen, illegally, my editorial's note, take over the local police force. In late July, Scott rejected a separate request from the Trump administration to allow a dozen Vermont Guard troops to do clerical work for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement at the federal agency's field office in St. Albans. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if there's one thing straight, there's one of many illegal, unlawful, unconstitutional requests denied rightfully and legally and constitutionally by none other than a Republican governor. Again, props to the Vermont governor for rightfully rejecting, yet again, this illegal request. Ladies and gentlemen, stay safe and always look for the points of light in today's unfortunate illegal induced darkness caused by the illegal, unconstitutional Trump administration. And as always, I look forward to talking to you guys in the next legal breaking reporting video analysis update.